I found a hidden room in my apartment. I wish I had never opened it. This happened a few years ago, and to this day, I still can't make sense of it. I had just moved into a small, affordable studio in an older building. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The place had charm, squeaky hardwood floors, outdated plumbing, and a landlord who gave off just enough of a shady vibe to make me question my decision. The first strange incident occurred on my very first night. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint scratching noise. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the wall behind my closet. I assumed it was rats or mice and tried to brush it off. But every night, without fail, the scratching returned. Always soft, always deliberate. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I knocked lightly on the wall, and something knocked back. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Instead of running, though, I did something incredibly stupid. I started tapping in a pattern, and whatever was on the other side mimicked me perfectly. At this point, I was convinced there was a squatter living in the walls. I called my landlord, who dismissed me outright. "That space has been sealed off for years," he said. "No one's in there." When I pressed him for details, he just told me to let it go. Naturally, I didn't. That weekend, I grabbed some tools and started prying at the wooden panels inside the closet. It took hours, but eventually a section came loose. Behind it was a dark, narrow passageway leading into what should have been the neighboring apartment. Except there was no neighboring apartment. According to the building's floor plan, my unit was supposed to be the last one on the floor. But here was this hidden space, completely unaccounted for. I should have walked away. I should have sealed it back up and pretended I'd never seen it. Instead, I crawled inside. The space was cramped, dusty, and reeked of something foul, like old wood and decay. My phone's flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but as I moved further in, I began to notice things. A thin, stained mattress, empty food containers covered in mold, stacks of clothes that looked disturbingly recent. Someone had been living here. Then I saw the photos. Dozens of Polaroids were scattered across the floor. Pictures of people sleeping, close-ups of their faces, their hands, their feet peeking out from under blankets. My stomach churned. The walls of the hidden room were covered in more photos, some so old they had turned yellow. And then I saw the most recent one. It was me, asleep in my bed, taken the night before. I don't remember how I got back to my apartment, but I do remember frantically sealing the wall shut. My hands trembling so badly, I cut myself in the process. I moved out the next day. I didn't even wait for my lease to end. To this day, I have no idea who was in that space. The landlord refused to answer any questions, and when I checked the building's records, there was no mention of another unit ever existing there. But sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I'm being watched, and I swear, I can still hear the scratching. I resigned from being a police officer. I never thought I'd say that to criticize the career I'd loved for the past 10 years, but here I am, ready to leave it all behind. I'm not going to work today, not after what happened last night. It was nearly midnight when I received a call, a domestic issue on the 2000 block. It was a quiet night. I'd been sitting in my car for most of it, so having something to do was a relief. Call didn't seem urgent. A neighbor had reported hearing a woman's cries from an apartment down the hall. Most of these calls turn out to be nothing, often just a parent scolding a child or a spouse venting frustration. I didn't even use my sirens as I drove over. I arrived at the apartment building and checked in with dispatch. The static-filled response echoed through the night. A few curious faces peered from windows, neighbors eager to see why a police car was parked outside. I tried to ignore them, but it always felt unsettling to be the bearer of bad news, like the calm after a storm. I walked down the corridor, and the blinds shut as I passed. I tried not to take it personally, but sometimes it gets to you. I reached the stairs and climbed to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit. A few lights flickered, buzzing with the threat of burnout. Even though no one was watching here, I felt an eerie presence. My steps echoed in the quiet, and though I resisted the urge to touch my holstered gun, my hand stayed clenched at my side. I've learned that the real monsters are often people, the ones who hurt others out of anger or spite. She was watching me from a slightly open door, her eyes wide with alarm. It startled me when I noticed her. I hadn't heard the door open. She gestured me closer with a trembling hand. My stomach churned. Something felt off. Maybe it was her disheveled appearance, but she didn't look welcoming. Yet I had a duty to help, and her frail state suggested she needed assistance. Her voice was weak, a blend of fear and neglect. Why did it take so long? I was confused, my thoughts slowed by fear, but then I noticed the apartment number. This was where the call came from. I steadied myself and asked for more details, but she hushed me, checking if anyone was listening. She almost closed the door as a light flickered overhead, her eyes begging for my approach. "It's down the hall. It's watching us." Her ominous tone made my heart race. A loud noise echoed down the corridor, startling me. The woman shut the door, and I finally placed my hand on my gun. At the end of the hall, a figure huddled in the shadows. I fumbled with my flashlight, hesitant to illuminate what seemed like a person in distress. But I turned it on, revealing a woman, trembling, her hair covering her face. She looked like she was in pain, though no sound escaped her. I took a cautious step. She flinched at the sound. I tried to reassure her, unsure if I was comforting her or myself. I reached for my radio to call for medical help, but there was no response. The woman had stopped moving. An uneasy feeling settled over me, like stepping into a trap. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The air felt thick, suffocating. The woman's breathing was heavy. I shifted slightly, and she lifted her head. Her mouth was covered, blood trickling down. Her eyes were not visible, but the blood on her cheeks was evident. She stood, and I instinctively drew my gun, stepping back. She ran towards me. In a panic, I dropped the flashlight and fired. I saw the bullets hit, but she kept moving. My gun was empty, and she was suddenly gone, the sound of a door slamming echoing. I reloaded, finally getting through on the radio. "Shots fired, I reported. Sirens approached, but so did another sound, a desperate call for help from behind the door. I shouted through it that help was coming, but the cries grew weaker. I couldn't wait. I broke down the door. "I'm dying," she pleaded from inside. The room fell silent as I entered, finding the woman in a corner, her back to me. "Show your hands," I ordered, but she didn't move. I approached, gun at the ready, when something else caught my attention. A figure behind the couch moved, revealing the woman from the hall, her mouth now free, her expression wild. She hissed, and I aimed my gun. "Get down," I commanded. Then I felt a sharp pain in my neck. The woman from the corner had bitten me. I struggled to free myself, but her grip was unyielding. My vision blurred, and everything went dark. But in that darkness, I sensed everything. The life around me, the aging building, the absence of other heartbeats, replaced by hunger. When I came to, help had arrived. They found me, but I knew I was different now. I refused medical attention, knowing I was beyond help. I returned home to find my partner waiting, worried. I couldn't even touch them, fearful of what I might do. I spent the night fighting the urge to harm, but eventually, my control slipped. Now I'm left with this new, monstrous existence, unable even to end it. I'm torn between hoping for solitude and dreading the arrival of anyone who might come looking for me. A therapist's dilemma. "I don't belong here," he mumbled, hands buried deep in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. The classic line every therapist hears, but never enjoys. "So why are you here then?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "My mom thinks I need help, but I don't." "What kind of help does she think you need?" His mouth sealed shut, his lips forming a thin line. "Look, I'll be honest with you," I said. "If you really don't want to be here, I won't force you. I work with people who want my help." His eyebrows lifted in surprise before settling back into a frown. "Just tell me why you think your mom feels this way. If it doesn't make sense, I can talk to her." He eyed me suspiciously. "She thinks I'm crazy. Just because I believe that?" His voice trailed off, his eyes dropping to the floor. "Hey, I've heard all sorts of things in this office. I'm not here to judge." He chewed on his lip for a moment. "Every time I let myself be happy, something bad happens." Cherophobia. Not officially in the DSM, but a common enough fear. That's a common belief. Many clients think that happiness leads to misfortune. I know, he said, his voice tinged with impatience. "But it's different for me. It's true. Your experiences have taught you that." That's how fears like this develop. People start associating happiness with bad outcomes. I've read about all that. I've Googled it, he interrupted, his eyes rolling. I held back a sigh. For me, he continued, I have proof. Multiple events. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through it. Interesting. He'd already documented his experiences. Perhaps this could lead into some therapeutic work. He handed me his phone, and I read through his entries, my brow furrowing deeper with each line. 15/12/2024. Felt happy on my birthday. Got a new skateboard. Later fell off and broke my arm. 2012/2024. Enjoyed a movie with friends. Got home to find my dog had run away. For 101/2025. New Year's resolution to be happier. Dropped my new phone in a puddle. 15/01/2025. Laughed at a funny video. Got food poisoning from lunch. 25/01/2025. Tried to enjoy a walk. Tripped and sprained my ankle. 05/02/2025. Finally smiled at a compliment. Got a flat tire on the way home. I looked up from the phone, seeing his taped up ankle. I rubbed my wrist, feeling a bit unsettled. You've had quite a run of bad luck, but it's not luck, he insisted. How can you be so certain? You don't see it, do you? I shook my head. I don't see what? He pointed beside him. There's something here with me. Oh no, not hallucinations. I hoped for his sake he was joking. I touched my wrist nervously. Is there supposed to be something there? I kept my voice light, hoping for humor. He thought for a moment, then sighed. I see a shadow. My uncle. I raised an eyebrow, then quickly lowered it. His mom hadn't mentioned an uncle. Your uncle's alive, right? Not my uncle, my biological uncle. Oh? This wasn't in his file. Is he no longer with us? He's dead. Died in a fire when I was 10. You know what he said to me last? What was it? I asked softly. I was happy, playing with my new toy car. He snatched it, crushed it, he told me. His expression darkened, his voice dropping. You shouldn't have been born. You're the reason your aunt is gone. You should be the one who's dead. I swallowed hard, an orphan with a tragic past. I hoped his adoptive family was good to him. That's awful. No child should hear that, but I did cause her death, he shrugged. She died giving birth to my cousin. I was just there. That's not your fault, I said firmly. It's not. He waved it off. That's not my main issue. The real problem is, he's been here since I was 12. It's been years. It could be early schizophrenia or a mood disorder with psychotic features. Did anything happen around that time? He was silent for a moment. I found an old picture of them, my biological aunt and uncle. They looked happy. Before. I'm sorry, I said, piecing together his story, feeling the weight of his guilt. Have you told your parents? He shook his head. They'd think I'm crazy. Besides, he says I can't tell anyone. But you told me. He looked at me, defiance in his voice. I had to. Thank you for trusting me. It's brave. If you're seeing things, it might be a sign of a serious condition. We should tell your parents to get you the right support. If it's just in my head, why does it affect my life? Coincidences. People trip, get sick. He cut me off, frustrated. You don't believe me. I'll show you. He stood, forcing a smile, then closed his eyes briefly. I'm going camping next month, he said with growing excitement. I'll see the stars. Nothing happened. He seemed surprised. I wish I could be normal, happy without fear, he said, hope flickering in his eyes. That's what we aim for, I replied. You deserve. A loud crack interrupted us, and glass shards from the overhead light rained down. I ducked, feeling a sharp pain in my left arm. I told you. Bad things happen, he exclaimed, panic in his voice. I'm okay, I lied, the pain sharp but bearable. Call for help. His phone wouldn't turn on. Neither would mine. Go get your mom, I urged, trying the door. It was stuck. I called out for my assistant, but there was no answer. She must be at lunch, he said, his voice trembling. I pressed the emergency button under my desk, hoping my assistant would return soon. I told you, he repeated, looking defeated. This is just bad luck, I said, not believing it myself. Then, a heavy pressure on my chest made me gasp. A stench of rot filled the air. He can't be happy, a voice hissed, chilling me to the bone. Go away, my client shouted, flailing at the air. The pressure lifted, but I saw him lift it off the ground, struggling. I need you to suffer, like I did, the voice continued. I stood, moving towards him as he dropped, gasping for air. The stench hit me again. You'll regret this, the voice warned. I raised my wrist, showing my tattoo, a protection symbol from a past incident. The voice laughed. That doesn't work. I flipped off the invisible presence, then started flailing, trying to breathe. Just as darkness edged my vision, the door burst open. My assistant had returned, hearing the commotion. The pressure vanished. I took in gulps of air, seeing my assistant, who had forced the door open. I needed to give her a raise. We cleaned up, avoiding details with his mother when she returned. She saw my injured arm and the marks on my neck, but didn't press for details. At the hospital, I learned my arm would heal. That night, I thought I smelled that stench again, but it was just a nightmare. In the morning, though, I saw the scratches on the bed frame. I'll be done with him soon. You're next, they read. The final drink. We were well into our 5th round when I first sensed something was amiss. The pub was bustling, the air heavy with the scent of stale beer and the low hum of conversation, with the music from the vintage record player setting a moody backdrop. It was the kind of place you only find when all other options are exhausted, dimly lit, with floors that stuck to your shoes, and a bartender who seemed to have seen it all, yet remained indifferent. I was there with my regular crew, Tom, Alex, Sarah, and Emma, trying to unwind after a grueling week. We'd been sharing laughs, swapping tales, and taking turns to buy drinks. But as I leaned back in my chair, feeling the warmth of the alcohol spread through me, an uneasy chill ran down my spine. I scanned the room, attempting to identify what felt out of place. The pub was crowded, but there was something unnatural about the crowd. People were chatting, sipping their drinks, and chuckling, yet their actions felt slightly delayed. Their smiles lingered just a touch too long. Once noticed, it was impossible to ignore. I nudged Sarah's arm. "Do these people seem weird to you?" "What do you mean?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I waved my hand towards the other patrons. "I can't put my finger on it. They seem like they're acting." She gave a small laugh. "Maybe you've had one too many." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps it was just the dim lighting and the drinks playing tricks on me. I tried to refocus on our conversation, but the unease persisted. Then I noticed him. A man in the darkest corner, solitary in his booth, not touching a drink or speaking. He was just watching me. A cold wave of fear washed over me. His eyes were deep, almost vacant, his face devoid of any expression. There was definitely something off about him. I quickly looked away, my heart racing. "Guys," I whispered, "try not to look, but there's a guy in the corner who's staring at me." Alex, ever the skeptic, just shook his head. "You're imagining things. I'm serious. Just sneak a peek." One by one, my friends subtly checked out the booth. Emma's face drained of color. "Okay, that is strange." Tom finished his drink in one gulp and shrugged it off. "It's just a weird dude. Let's not give him any attention." I tried to agree, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Suddenly, the record player stopped. Just like that, the music ceased mid-tune, enveloping the pub in a heavy silence. All around, conversations and laughter ended abruptly. Every single person turned, as if on cue, to look directly at us. My throat tightened. Their eyes were dark, mirroring the man in the booth. Their expressions were blank, void. I jumped up, my chair scraping loudly. "We need to get out. Now." No objections came. We gathered our belongings and headed for the exit, but the bartender moved to block our path. "Leaving already?" he asked, his tone disturbingly flat. "Yeah, early morning," I stuttered. He gave a smile, but it was unnatural, too broad. "Stay for one more drink." I looked at my friends. They were frozen, faces pale. I forced a laugh. "Maybe another time." His smile didn't waver, but he stepped aside. "If you insist." I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open, and we hurried out into the chilly night. We didn't stop until we were at Emma's car. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, finally unlocking the doors. We all piled in, closing the doors with a bang. Silence filled the car as we caught our breath, our exhalations fogging up the windows. Alex finally spoke. "What was that?" I just shook my head. "I don't know." Emma started the car, but before pulling away, she glanced back at the pub, and her face went ashen. I looked where she was staring, and my heart sank. The pub was no longer there. Not shut down, not deserted. It was gone. In its place was an ancient, dilapidated structure. Windows broken, the sign barely hanging by rusted chains. The lights were out, the parking lot overgrown with weeds. I felt nauseous. That can't be right. We were just inside. No one found words. Then, Emma hit the accelerator. We never spoke of that night again. But now, when I sense that odd feeling while out, I settle my bill and leave. Because I've learned, some places you're not meant to leave. The notes I should have read sooner. I moved into my apartment a year ago. It's nothing special, just a small one-bedroom on the third floor of an old building. The kind of place where every sound echoes. Footsteps in the hallway, the groan of pipes in the walls, muffled conversations drifting through the vents. My neighbor, Mr. Robertson, was an older man who kept to himself. He always wore the same black cardigan and shuffled down the hall with his head down. I tried greeting him a few times, but he never said much, just a nod and a quiet shuffle past me. Then the notes started appearing. They were small, folded pieces of paper slipped under my door. No envelopes, no explanations, just short, scribbled messages in shaky handwriting. The first one read, "Do not let it know you see it." I laughed it off, thinking it was just the ramblings of an eccentric old man. Maybe he was paranoid or suffering from dementia. I tossed the note in the trash and forgot about it until the second one came. "It watches you when you sleep." Okay, that was creepy, but I still convinced myself it was harmless nonsense. Maybe Mr. Solomon had been watching too many horror movies. I ignored it. Then came the third note. "Check your closet. Do it now." That one got under my skin. I actually got up and checked, half expecting to find something horrifying. But there was nothing, just my clothes, shoes, and a pile of laundry I'd been avoiding. I almost went next door to tell Mr. Robertson to stop, but I didn't want to be rude. He was old, probably lonely. So I let it go. Then, 3 nights ago, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was soft but rhythmic, coming from inside my closet. At first I thought it might be a mouse, but the longer I lay there, the more deliberate it sounded. Slow, like whatever was inside was waiting for me to notice. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the closet door, my heart pounding. After what felt like hours, the scratching finally stopped. The next morning I found another note under my door. "It knows you heard it." That was when I decided to confront Mr. Solomon. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. I tried again later. Still nothing. That evening, I asked the landlord if he was okay. The landlord gave me a strange look and said, "Mr. Solomon? He moved out 2 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. That couldn't be right. I had just gotten a note from him the night before. I went back to my apartment, my mind racing. If Mr. Solomon was gone, who had been slipping those notes under my door? That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing things, soft shuffling sounds, the occasional creak of my closet door. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Then, last night, I woke up to the worst sound yet. Breathing, right next to my bed. It was slow, shallow, not mine, not human. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to that ragged, uneven breathing. Then, from the darkness, a whisper. "You should have listened." I don't remember what happened after that. Maybe I passed out. Maybe I ran. All I know is when I woke up this morning, my closet door was wide open, and there was one last note on my nightstand. "It likes you now." I'm writing this from my car. I don't think I'm going back inside.